This is GARIS, Masculist, MGTOW flyers, that is 2-3 page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de GARIS. This is flyer number 372, entitled Masculism 101 for Female Moderates. Description. This flyer spells out the main ideas of the Masculists to the more moderate of women, who are less feminazi bitchy, less one-eyed monoconscious feminists, and hence are more open to persuasion to the idea that the Masculists have very good reason to push their gender political agenda, to liberate men from fluffy parasitism / manslavery, and from fluffy feminist hypocrisy / genocide. Masculists need to educate society, which implies educating women, starting with the more open-minded women, the female moderates. Flyer itself. Click on the link. Here's the original word. Masculism 101 for Female Moderates by Prof. Dr. Hugo de GARIS. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. This flyer is aimed at the moderate women, that is, those who are not real feminazi bigots, who are not too close-minded to be open to masculist ideas. It lays out the main masculist arguments, 101 style, so that open-minded, moderate women who are capable of listening to what the masculists have to say can be persuaded of the masculist strongest, undeniable arguments. Masculism in 2020 is where second-wave feminism was in the late 1960s, that is just getting off the ground. Masculism has not even broken yet the media barrier, and will probably face a harder time of doing that than did the feminists of the late 1960s, because feminism has now so penetrated the culture that society as a whole has been brainwashed into the idea that any male criticism of women is taboo, which makes the job of the masculist theorists, like myself, all the harder, because not only do we masculists have to teach society of a new set of gender political ideas, but we also have to overcome the ignorant prejudice of a feministed culture that is quite closed-minded and intolerant of the very legitimate claims and complaints of the masculists. So this masculist flyer is not so much a diatribe against fluffy feminist hypocrites / genociders, nor against fluffy parasites / manslavers, but is aimed more at those women who do not have much of a gender political axe to grind, who are not rabid, one-eyed, monoconscious feminazis who hate men, and who are well informed about how men oppress women, but who know nothing of the reverse, that is, are utterly clueless about masculist ideas. The whole point of this flyer is to help increase the level of awareness of women, the more open women, of how women oppress men, and to help increase the level of acceptance amongst women, who after all make up half the population, of masculist ideas, so that society becomes much more bi-conscious, that is, has both its feminist and its masculist consciousnesses raised. Women now dominate journalism. Women are more interested in people and relationships than are men, so pour into the journalism schools and the media. These women, with their bachelor degrees and their women's studies, are well aware how men oppress women, but know nothing about masculism. Most of these women haven't even heard the term masculist before, but can guess what the term means due to its obvious similarity with the word feminist. That is, masculism is some kind of men's lib, but most monoconscious feminists, that is, who have only had one gender political consciousness raised, that is, their feminist consciousness, know nothing about masculism, so are often incredulous about what masculism could possibly be about, because to a monoconscious feminist, it's so obvious and unquestioned that gender oppression is a one-way street, that is, perpetrated by men against women. Most feminists accept this idea so deeply, so unquestionably, that the very idea of a real need for a masculism, a liberation of men, sounds ridiculous to most women, so they remain closed-minded towards this second gender political ideology that the masculist theorists are busily occupied in formulating now. So, masculists need to persuade feminists, the more open-minded feminists, and women in general, that there is very definitely a case to be made for the masculists, that gender oppression is very much a two-way street, and that men need liberating a lot more than women, since men's oppression by women is much stronger and deeper than the reverse. This fly is aimed at persuading these more moderate, more open-minded women and feminists that the above is actually true, by presenting the strongest of the masculist arguments, so that just about any non-bigoted woman will be forced to accept these arguments due to their very nature, that is, that they are so obvious, so undeniable, transparent, and scientifically based, not just ideologically based, although there's a lot to be said for effective masculist propaganda, just the way the feminists propaganded their message to billions of women. So, what are these very powerful masculist arguments? Where to begin? I begin with some major claims that may sound preposterous to most women who have never even heard of masculism. For example, quote, "Traditional women are manslaving parasites. Most feminists are sexist hypocrites. That we men have the financial power to force women to grow up, to FIP up, that is, become FIPs, that is, financially independent persons, and not parasite off the money of a man." End quote. Masculists see fluffy feminists as hypocrites. In brackets, a fluffy is a masculist label for a woman who expects to be able to live off the money and labour of a man, thus enslaving him, manslaving him, and hence is hated by the masculists, who are out to destroy such women by wiping them out, by totally ignoring them, not even pumping and dumping them, forcing them to rot on the shelf, manless, loveless, sexless, babyless, and as masculism spreads, increasingly spat at for being manslaving vermin to be wiped out. In brackets. A fluffy feminist wants equal rights for women in the parliaments, but rejects equal obligations in sharing out the burden of earning the living with men, by not bothering to FIP up, by not bothering to get a career competent education at high school and education and university, then expects men to pay for them in the divorce courts. Hence the hypocrisy of fluffy feminists that is so hated by the masculists, who have an even greater hatred of the fluffy feminists than the fluffies. It's bad enough that the fluffies are parasites and hence manslavers, but the fluffy feminists are also hypocrites who have taken over the divorce courts and made them so toxic for males that fluffy feminists have become indirect genociders who have to be stopped, or whole populations will be wiped out due to the fact that now 2/3 of young men reject marriage and paternity, given that marriage is now such a shitty deal for men. After the above beefy introduction, where does all this masculinist anger and hatred come from? To understand this, to have one's masculinist consciousness raised, that is, to become aware of masculinist arguments and the gender political goals of the masculists, one needs to be familiar with a bit of gender political history, which I now give. A century ago or more, families were large. For example, my own mother had 11 other siblings living on a farm. Health standards had risen, for example, with sewage systems in the towns, and compulsory primary schooling made the citizenry literate so that they could learn about hygiene, etc., and so lived healthier lives, so that not half their children died before adulthood as in earlier centuries. During the same period, the capitalist industrial age was developing, so that the traditional multi-generational family was broken up into its most mobile form to follow the jobs in the factories. Of the nuclear family, of dad, who earned the money for the whole family, of mom, who looked after a horde of kids, a very full-time job, cooking many meals over a wooden stove, chopping the wood, washing the clothes, hanging them out to dry, mending garments, sewing, etc. Being mother in those days was a very busy job. Then came the electrical age in the 20th century with household gadgets, and particularly the miracle of the male-invented contraceptive pill, which I believe is the greatest social revolution in history, allowing women to reliably control the number of kids they wanted, and they wanted 0, 1 or 2 in most cases. This sharp reduction in the number of kids women had caused a revolution in women's lifestyle. They suddenly found themselves with time on their hands, with their washing machines, their irons, their dishwashers, etc. They felt increasingly that their lives, their talents, were being wasted as housewives. So in the 60s, a social political movement of bored, upper middle class housewives grew up, called second wave feminism, as a follow-up from the first wave, which was largely about obtaining the right to vote for women, the suffragettes. So women started streaming into the workforce in the 70s, causing a lot of discomfort and unease with traditional men who liked being able to escape the domestic scene from their nagging wives to spend hours on end in an all-male environment, namely at work. This traditional male backlash caused a lot of resentment, bitterness and hatred on the part of women who wanted to be given equal rights as men, equal opportunities to enter the professions as men, equal status and respect level for women as men, etc. Thus the second wave of feminism was born, that fought for equal rights and opportunities for women, the right to terminate an unwanted pregnancy, the right to divorce purely for reasons of incompatibility, etc. The second wave feminists had achieved nearly all of their legal reform goals by the 70s and 80s, so that really only left the more distant goals of achieving real power for women, which is the focus of the third wave of feminists, the children of the second wavers, who are out to set up 50-50 quotas for women in the number of female politicians, the number of female members on management boards of companies, etc. That is real female power. What these second and third wave feminists did not think much about, if at all, was, what about men? How would the fipping of women affect men, liberate men? Most feminists kept their traditional expectations of men, their attitudes towards men, intact, unquestioned. They saw men as cash machines, put on this earth to pay for women to have babies. Most women still have this attitude deeply ingrained into their psyches. The very criteria that women use to judge men, that is, men's desirability by women, is inherently parasitic on the part of women. This traditional female attitude and expectations of men is expressed in a cartoon of a woman holding a dog leash around the neck of a man who is on all fours, with her commanding, in quotes, "Sit, walk, buy me stuff, good boy." The masculists are way ahead of the feminists in preaching to women what men want, what masculists want. Masculists see women's fipping as the precondition for the liberation of men, freeing men from manslavery, that is, the traditional price that men paid to get regular sex from a woman, that is, that he worked for her, paid for her to live in a middle-class house to raise her kids in, with him paying for it all. The feminists then took over the divorce courts, renaming them family courts, and brought their monoconscious feminist attitudes with them, seeking to give women privileges in the divorce settlements that women did not have before, with the unquestioned attitudes that men were put on this earth to pay for women to have babies. That is, men were seen essentially as cash machines to be abused and robbed in the divorce courts. Many men's lib organisations in the early days, from the 70s and 80s onwards, were fathers' rights organisations, which pushed for joint custody of children by default, removal of alimony, etc. But the divorcing feminists and the feminist divorce court lawyers and judges knew nothing about masculism, so saw the divorce process purely in terms of a feminist perspective, and gave little thought, if any, towards how men perceived divorce. Men perceive divorce very badly, so much so that they coined the term divorce rape, since that is how it felt. Consider what happens to a typical divorcing father in many advanced countries today. He will lose custody of his kids with a 90% probability. This reality alone causes millions of young men to advise each other, "Hey guy, don't be a fool. Don't marry. Don't have kids. Spend your money on yourself. Don't be a manslave to a fluffy parasite. Go your own way. Be a MGTOW, that is, men going their own way." One father in 4 will lose custody of his kids. This sucks so badly that millions of men are saying, fuck marriage, fuck having kids, and fuck the feminazi bitches who are doing this to men. Kill them by forcing them to rot on the shelves, by totally ignoring them, not even pumping and dumping them. End quote. It gets worse. Divorcing fathers are forced to give up their house to their fluffy ex-wife. She can raise her kids in it, lose half his stuff to her, even if she doesn't lift a finger to bother to fip up and help pay her own way. He will make child payments to his kids, whom he will barely see, and often, if his ex-wife is a real fluffy, be forced to pay her alimony for life, so that she remains a parasite of his money and labour after the divorce, the way she was before the divorce. Anyone, male or female, who is made aware of the massive injustices that are committed daily against divorcing fathers in the fluffy feminist-controlled divorce courts gets angry. This sucks. This has to change. Otherwise, these fluffy feminist divorce court judges and lawyers are becoming indirect genociders, wiping out whole populations, since millions of